Hi, I'm Jennifer Helinek. I'm in the last semester of my master's in Eastern European Studies, which means I'm in the thick of thesis season, and it's just about that time when I'm having to stop myself from talking about my thesis in every single conversation that I have, at housewarmings, at the bodega, at the vet. They're all hearing about Czech literature, so it's really nice to have this socially acceptable release valve tonight to tell you about the Magnesia Litera, which is the Czech Republic's most prestigious literary prize, and it was founded in 2002. So I'm going to level with you. When I tell people that I'm writing my master's thesis on a Czech literary prize, they typically have a moment, and I can see it behind the eyes. They have a moment when they have to remind themselves that Columbia is not a public institution. So thank God their tax dollars aren't going to this, you know? But this is actually one of the things that I love about my thesis. I think that people's reactions and their instinct that this is just the most niche thing to ever be niche, that those reactions reveal something. They reveal that I think it's difficult for people to imagine a society with literature at its center, right? But those societies have existed before. They existed in Central and Eastern Europe until they didn't, and that's a big part of the story that I'm going to take you along for right now. So there's a scholar named Andrew Barak-Wachtel who wrote a whole book about this. Well, I mean, he and his research assistants wrote a whole book about this, let's be real. And he says that it's a little strange for tourists who aren't from Eastern Europe when they go there and they see that on the pedestals where in our countries we have political and military figures. In Eastern Europe, the people that they've cast in bronze and metal are poets and writers. There are monuments to poets and writers everywhere. And it's really because writers built these nations. In the 19th century, primarily, there was a strong sense that in order for a nation to prove its existence, especially a nation without a state, right, that it needed a body of significant literature in that nation's language to kind of point to and say, look, this is who we are. So to write in Czech was, in a sense, to create and solidify what it meant to have a Czech consciousness to begin with. And this type of nation building continued all the way up through the communist period when the so-called, voices of the nation, our favorite characters here, Milan Kundera, Václav Havel, Ludvík Vaculík, but many others as well, they were equally literary and political figures. And I think that that's an interesting dynamic, that they weren't one or the other, because at the time these things were still really naturally linked. There was still a sense that one of the major ways that a nation processed things collectively was through novels and plays and poetry and essays. So the 1990s happened, and some things changed, just a few things changed. It was an incredibly chaotic time in Czech publishing. There was an influx of books by foreign writers, and notably a lot of these books were from genres that the communist markets had actively suppressed, so romance, crime novels, thrillers, that sort of thing. Of course, the entire structure of how writers and publishers got paid to begin with, that changed overnight. And other types of media were also flooding the country at this time. So beyond books, I mean, people just had so many more options for what to do now, and who was going to stay home and read. I mean, maybe I would have in that situation, but most of the people were not going to stay at home and read under those conditions. So the result was that suddenly the type of literature that had always been influential, it was difficult for it to make a mark anymore. A poetry collection that could have sold, 10,000 copies before 1989. Now it was difficult to sell 100 copies of that same poetry collection and to get people talking about it, to have it really create a societal conversation. So in the new structure of democratic capitalism, Czech writers for the first time began to be seen not as central figures, but as peripheral figures in society. People, we liked them, they're creating a type of art, but they're not a rarefied breed of people who had their finger on the pulse of society and who in turn all of society looked to and listened to, right? So, this is the question. How do you promote books in a society that doesn't really care all that much about books? It's a painfully relevant question for all of us here tonight, I think. This is one of our societies too. And one of the most popular ways to do that is through a literary prize. It's to take arts and make it into a competition, have there be something of a spectacle, announce long lists and short lists to build anticipation up to a night when there's one winner and everyone else is in some way a loser. There's an acceptance speech, cameras flash, journalists have something to say about books, that's not just book reviews, and ideally sales of these featured titles rise. So I've been studying the first 10 years of the Magnesia Litera to try to see how it established credibility from nothing, right? And in such a turbulent time in 2002. And I went to Prague in January to speak to a lot of different authors and journalists and editors. And honestly, I played my cards right, because being in Prague in the new year, just to interview literary people and chat about literary prizes, it was a great time. But I do want to end this little talk just to say that, when it comes to my own life, one of the reasons I chose this topic is that I've tried to live a fully literary life myself. And putting my hands up here, I've failed at that so far. Before going back to school, I was working as a foreign rights agent here in the city, selling American and Canadian books into foreign markets. And I'm making a change now mostly because I want to do other types of work. I'm really interested in international relations. But also, when I was working in publishing, and I want to be really frank, when I thought about my future, I felt afraid. I mean, it's a really precarious life for a lot of people. It's an industry that wastes a lot of talent and passion, and it's all within a society that doesn't value the results of passion all that much. So it's just not that easy to build a life with literature at the center. I think a lot of people would say that. So for the moment, I'm not aiming for books to be my full-time job, but I also know that a big part of the work I want to do in the world is to promote East Central European literature to English language audiences. And I hope that after I graduate, I'll find a way to do that sort of on my own and in my own terms. So thank you. Thank you for your time.